I'm here with Dr. Mark Goulston, who is a psychiatrist and an expert on, among other things, post-traumatic stress and how to deal with triggers. And so Mark is inspired one of our challenges that we're using with the Sabre 6 Foundation to help people manage their triggers. So Mark, welcome.
Well, always glad to be with you. Always glad to help your foundation.
Thanks, Mark. What does it mean to be triggered?
I think what it means is that we're kind of moving along in life and suddenly something unexpected happens, catches us off guard. And if you've been in the military and you've been through trauma, what happens is being caught off guard is not a good thing. In fact, if you're listening to this, it may be that a number of the symptoms of PTS are we isolate, we don't connect with other people. Sadly, we drink to numb ourselves. But when we're driving along in our pickup truck and we're not around any other people on the highways, just neat, we lower our guard until a car backfires. And so what happens is a trigger is something that seems to be out of the blue. But if you have PTS, what can happen is it can stir up all the kinds of triggers that you had to deal with. And you dealt with them by pushing them away, by pushing them down, because you had to focus on the mission. You had to focus on the task in front of you. You didn't have time to mourn or grieve your best friend who just got killed. You had to report back to the front. And so what happened is you pushed it all away. And sometimes you can think, oh, I'm pretty cool. I got this thing handled. But often what's happening is your sense of mission, your sense of having to survive, triggers a lot of adrenaline. And adrenaline insulates you. NBA players can play on a fractured leg because of adrenaline. It insulates you from the pain. But in order to survive in the military, the adrenaline insulates you from thoughts and feelings that would normally freak you out. But then when you leave the military, the adrenaline and the danger goes away. And so the insulation goes away. And it feels like it's very close to the surface. And so what happens is you have something called an increased startle reflex, meaning a car backfiring, something sudden happens, you jump out of your skin. And then you have to manage that.
Right. Well, what typically happens when people get triggered? What are some of the normal responses when somebody's triggered?
Well, your pulse goes up, your heart rate goes up. There's a huge release of cortisol. You've probably heard that cortisol is the stress hormone. And we need that. It alerts us. It also triggers a part of our brain and our mind called the amygdala. And the amygdala is like a point guard in our brain. And it actually triggers us to focus on survival. You've probably heard of fight or flight, but if you're well trained, and there's few people as well trained as the military, it can focus you on your training and you just get through it and you make your way through it. And because of all the exercise, all the things that you had to go through, you really are pretty strong. But when we get out of active duty and we get triggered, we don't have that purpose, mission, survival to insulate us. And so what happens is it makes us feel like we can't handle it. And one of the things we talked about in the previous meeting was we used the trigger word downshift. And people seem to like the word downshift because when you're driving and you're on a curvy road, and whether you're on a motorcycle or a pickup truck or a car, downshifting increases your torque. Downshifting pulls the road towards you. You feel more in control. If instead of downshifting, you step on the accelerator, you lose control. You can drive off the side of the road.
Right.
And a lot of people know that visceral feeling. It was interesting when I was in college, one of my little secrets I kept from my parents is I bought a motorcycle. Not different from a lot of people, and not different that I kept secrets. But one of the things that I loved about the motorcycle is that when I downshift, I just felt this sense of control. And it was a wonderful feeling. And I didn't drive crazy. I mean, some of my friends would say that they had narcolepsy. They said, I fall asleep through life until the pegs of my motorcycle are scraping the pavement.
Oh my, that can't be safe.
Well, yeah, but it woke them up. It woke them up.
Yeah. I know some of the things that tend to trigger me. Being in large crowds, I can feel the tension and the cortisol raising. And for me, it makes me very anxious. When I'm at the gym and somebody slams weights.
Well, I think what's happening is you're brittle. So when you're exercising and you're focused on the task in front of you, not unlike being in active duty, you feel a sense of focus, purpose, mission, but it's a brittle kind of focus, meaning as long as it's not disturbed, you're okay, but you realize it's brittle when, as you say, someone else drops weights or someone else yells. Another trigger, maybe not for you, but for many people, is when you're home and your spouse yells at you. Now, when you were in the military, part of your training was you got yelled at a lot. Focus you on the mission. You may not have liked it, but you liked how it prepared you. You liked how it taught you amazing skills under pressure. But again, that was something that you appreciated. You may not have liked your commanding officer, but the person who was training you. But if you felt their commitment to you, you were good with it because you knew it was making you stronger and great at what you do. But again, you come home and it's not the same. And so when someone yells at you at home, it may actually remind you that you didn't like being yelled at in the military, but it was serving a greater purpose. It was training you for combat.
Right. And so at home, when we get triggered, we get this cortisol, this adrenaline goes up. And when you get to what you call the amygdala hijack, you start to act out.
So the way that works, by the way, the amygdala hijack, which some of you may have heard of, is that when we're under stress, and I make a distinction between stress and distress. There's actually something called eustress, EUSTRESS, and that's good stress. There's good stress that can make you stronger, smarter, quicker, and better. And that's good stress. Then there's stress, which you can still focus on what you need to do, but it's harder, but you can focus, you can double down. And then there's distress. And distress, when it becomes too much, you can't focus on the goal in front of you. You focus on relieving the distress in any way you can. And often you'll do that, as I said, by drinking, by drugs, by just saying, I'm out of here, slamming the door and going for a ride in your car or truck or going for a walk, because your focus is the distress. And that's what happens when you're out of active duty, is that you focus on just trying to do anything to get out of the distress. And the problem is the things you do to get out of the distress that aren't constructive, as I mentioned, drinking, drugs, yelling, slamming the door, going out and driving 100 miles an hour, they may feel better for the moment, but they actually make things worse. Getting drunk, drugs, yelling at your family, having to apologize, feeling ashamed, feeling embarrassed, feeling then I'm a burden to my family. What is wrong with me? And so it can go into all sorts of negative places. And so part of what we're doing here with this coping mechanism, which is the Triggered Downshift Reframe, is a way to actually train your mind and your brain to not react to the distress in a destructive way.
Okay. So when we get triggered and we don't have the right coping skills or coping mechanisms, then once you get triggered, you start to act out, whether it could be yelling, slamming the doors, as you mentioned, driving your car 100 miles an hour, alcohol, drugs. All these are efforts at some sort of pain relief or distress relief that is counterproductive in the long run for the reasons that you mentioned. Are there some common causes of getting triggered?
Well, I think anything that's unexpected and surprising. Anything, especially if you've been in the military, that is similar to something you may have experienced but coped with. You may have suppressed your thoughts and feelings to function. So loud noises, yelling. But again, that was part of everyday life that you dealt with as best you could because you were in active duty. So I think things like that. I also think that being told you're wrong. A lot of people feel stressed because they often feel they don't do anything right, that they're always wrong. And if you think about that, if you feel like I'm always wrong, that's really close to I'm incompetent. And if I'm incompetent, I don't have any confidence. And if you combine incompetent, a lack of confidence, you feel like you're out of control. And this happens so often. Well, this happens so often in all marriages, but I think it's especially true when you've been in active duty and your spouse really doesn't understand that. They can try to be sympathetic, but they just don't understand it.
So sorry to jump in. So in the military, all the sort of purpose and belonging mission with the military is kind of like a big wet blanket over these different triggers. And so we don't overreact to being yelled at, to loud noises, things like that, because we've got this blanket. We got this wet blanket that is, I guess, suppressing our acting out. Outside the military, that blanket's gone. And so there's nothing really suppressing the triggers anymore. And thus it's more likely to get the amygdala hijack and all of the acting out that you described. Is that a fair characterization?
That's totally accurate.
And so we look at causes. You've mentioned unexpected noises, sounds, unexpected actions would be one kind of causes of being triggered. The sense of that you're always wrong, you're not competent, you're not valued would be a second one. Loss of control. You feel like you don't have any control is a third one. I know I've experienced all three of these. What else are typical causes of being triggered?
Well, I think we've covered it. I mean, people can certainly weigh in, but it's the unexpected, something that we feel that we've lost control. I'll share something which I don't have science behind this, but I want to share something that I'm working on about depression and anxiety. It's a different approach to it. A lot of times when we get depressed, it's because we expected something to happen that we were banking on too much, and it didn't happen. So we plummeted. You know, we
Let down.
oh yeah, we expected our military experience to be different than it really was. We expected all of our training to prepare us for anything, physically, mentally. And so I believe that when I've spoken to people who've been depressed, and I ask them, what are some of the expectations you had that didn't come through, that you were banking on too much and you plummeted? Well, I expected this job would work out and it didn't. I got fired. I got laid off. I expected this relationship would work out and it didn't. And we got divorced. We broke up. I expected to be able to stay focused through some task I was supposed to do, and then I couldn't. And so I think helping people to talk about what was some of the expectations that have happened to you in the past that you were counting on too much, that when it didn't happen, you plummeted. And you weren't weak, you were just human.
Right.
And I think just being able to talk about that can give you a little bit of a sense of control. And my approach on anxiety is it's when you have an expectation in the future that you don't think is going to work out. So anxiety is about the future. Depression is about the past. And a lot of anxiety is, well, I'm going to apply for the job. I'm not going to get it.
Right.
I'm going to be able to handle, I haven't worked in a long time. I'm going to be able to handle the first day on the job, and I couldn't. And so I believe anxiety is when you have an expectation of the future and you're anxious because it's not going to work out. It's not going to work out. And then, of course, what goes on into your mind is, well, if it doesn't work out, it's going to be like what happened in the past and I'm going to plummet. And again, I think sometimes just talking this through with someone in your family, by the way, this is a great thing to talk through with your children, getting through the stresses of their childhood and teen years. What were you expecting that didn't happen? So when it didn't happen, what was the first thing? What did you feel physically? Did you feel it in your stomach? When it happened or didn't happen the way you thought, what did you think? What did it make you want to do? Because what you're really trying to do with other people and yourself is to be able to literally and figuratively take your finger off the trigger and put space between an impulse and an action.
Awesome. So we've got.
Well, here's a coping mechanism that I have something I call the Dead Mentor Society. I have 8 mentors. They've all died. And if you haven't had a mentor, it's never too late. John Wooden wrote a wonderful book about the power of mentors. John Wooden was the winningest coach in college basketball at UCLA. And he talked about mentors that he never met, Abraham Lincoln, Mother Teresa, but also mentors in his life. And some of his players, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, you can tell that when they spoke about coach, I can't guarantee it, but I think if you ask them, as you look at your entire career, what was some of the highest moments? I am guessing that many of them would say it's when I played under coach at UCLA. And I use my Dead Mentor Society. Whenever I get triggered, I can call upon any of these 8 mentors to talk me down from DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5.
Right.
Because I will often beat up on myself. I don't beat up on other people. I'll tend to pull aside. But when I think I've done something really stupid, I can really lay into myself, and I'll call upon one of my dead mentors and I'll say, I did it again. And I can just picture them. I can picture their voice. And what happens is, and here's the physiology of it, is I picture them talking me through it. I picture them kidding me through it. I picture them supporting me through it. And, and when that happens, I get a surge of something called oxytocin.
Mm.
Oxytocin is emotional connectedness. And if you look up and do a search, oxytocin versus cortisol, oxytocin helps lower cortisol, helps prevent an amygdala hijack. That's why I think if you're listening to this, it is so important, to develop a squad, a fire team, maybe a buddy that you check in with each week, every day, or you send them an email and say, oh, I got triggered. I said to myself, downshift, and it was really hard. But then I was able to reframe. I was able to think what you would tell me.
Okay, and we're going to get to each of those steps here in just a second. So to recap, when we get triggered, we can act out in the sense of yelling, slamming doors, taking other sorts of physical activity, driving a car or motorcycle really fast, recklessness, drugs, alcohol, etc. And then you also mentioned we can also tend to beat ourselves up. So we'll just kind of stew and spiral downward internally. And in terms of different causes, we can get triggered by unexpected noises and sounds. We get triggered by the feeling that we're always wrong, we're not competent, we're not valued. So that'd be another class of trigger. Loss of control. And then you said a crisis of expectations, where we had certain expectations here, we got let down, and that can be a trigger. And then of course there's anxiety, which maybe is a fifth class, where we have expectations about the future that we don't think are ever going to be met. And so that creates this feeling of anxiety inside of us. Is that a fair summary?
That's better than fair.
All right. So what do we do about it? That's the key. You've got a 3-step process that I want to kind of I want you to walk us through that. We'll just take each step in return. So you've got a 3-step process. And what are those 3 steps?
Well, the first thing is to be able to recognize, be able to say to yourself, I'm being triggered. I just got triggered. And again, I call upon any of my dead mentors. So they would say, Mark, you just got triggered. Oh, okay. And when I'm thinking of them and thinking of how much they cared about me and believed in me, that works better for me than my saying to myself, I'm being triggered. But that's just me. That's my makeup. But you can say to yourself, I'm being triggered.
Okay. So the first step is just to acknowledge that you're triggered. The second step you call downshift. And then the third step is reframe.
Right.
Okay,
and to me, the downshift is don't do anything to make it worse.
Right. So can we start with triggered?
Sure.
Okay. So why is it what makes acknowledging that you've been triggered so important? Why is that the first step?
Because when you can put an accurate word to what you're feeling, it lowers amygdala activation. There's a fellow at UCLA, Matt Lieberman, and he's given a lot of credit for this. And he talks about affective labeling. Affect means feelings. And when you can attach an accurate word to what you're feeling, it calms you down. So when you think to yourself, I'm being triggered, there's something about actually using the word that tends to calm you down.
I was reading a book by Susan David called Emotional Agility. And she makes a similar point where if you don't label the emotion, it's like this tape that goes along in the back of your head and it starts to mess with you. But once you can label it, once you put it out there, you can label it, whether it's triggered or it's something like I feel fear, I feel anxiety, I feel sadness. then it's something that becomes suddenly, because you've labeled it, becomes tangible. And when it's tangible, you can deal with it.
Yeah. So instead of it being that tape going all over the place, what's happening to me? You say, I'm being triggered. Dang, I'm being triggered again. Well, God, I can't stand it when I'm triggered, but it makes it understandable as opposed to what's happening. And then you want to go into a panic. And then the second part of a sense of coherence is it makes it more manageable. It feels like you're in more control. And then the third part of a sense of coherence is that it has to be meaningful, meaning, wow, this really kept me from yelling at someone or going out and getting drunk. This really helped me handle it.
Right. So when you say triggered, you're making it tangible. It's no longer this sort of mysterious thing that's messing with our brain. It's tangible, it's manageable, and because it's manageable, now I can govern my own behavior, which is the whole point. Right?
Right.
We're going to be triggered by stuff, but the question is, do we act on those triggers or do we control our behavior?
Absolutely.
So the second step then is what you call downshift. So tell me more about downshift.
So downshift is, okay, the first is you recognize I've been triggered.
Right.
What you're feeling is I've been triggered. When I've been triggered before, I can sometimes go out of control. I can sometimes do really self-defeating things. The second step, downshift, is signaling to yourself, and you can do this through breathing, just stay centered. So the single best coping mechanism that I've ever learned for myself is when I get triggered and I say to myself, downshift, I put myself on a 72-hour hold. I say, don't do anything now to make it worse.
So in saying downshift, what you are saying to yourself is, okay, let's retain control of this situation and take some action between stimulus and response. So between stimulus and response is downshift. And within downshift, you're doing things, maybe it's your breathing, you're giving yourself some emotional, psychological distance from the response. If there's time, you can exercise, you can go for a walk. If there's not time, maybe it's breathing, maybe it's something else that allows you, whatever mechanism you have that allows you to retain control of your response to that trigger. So that's what downshift is. Getting a space between, creating that space of control between stimulus and response. Okay, and then the third step then is reframe, and what do you mean by that, and how does that work?
Well, I'll share a little story with you for the purpose of explaining this. I was recently diagnosed with a condition, and I'm not going to die immediately, but I'm not going to live as long as I expected. And I don't want to say it's been wonderful, but it's been remarkable. And here was my reframe. Dying isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. So a reframe you can use is this situation, being fired from this job, is not happening to me, it's happening for me. And for myself, the reframe has been remarkable. And my reframe is it's happened for me because I've never been able to quite realize what's important in life to the level that I'm realizing it now. I mean, every day what I'm learning is unbelievable. And I think I knew it, but I didn't feel it or believe it. What's really been helpful, the reframe, is I'm really recognizing what's really unimportant. And I am lopping that stuff off every day.
Well, Mark, I know all of us who know you were devastated by that news, and we appreciate you sharing that with us. And hopefully the whatever prognosis is off by many, many factors. And
Look, I appreciate the caring, and I'm not. And I'll tell you something else that's really weird. I think much of my life I've felt a little bit depressed. And I think that's enabled me to feel other people's feelings, to empathize with them, to not be so clinically distant. I have zero depression. I have a little anxiety because the timetable's a little bit different, but I feel sad. I look at my grandchildren, and when they're not looking, I'll cry a little bit. But it's amazing that I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it's I said to someone, one of the best ways to get rid of suicidal feelings is to be told you're going to die. I mean, maybe it's a sense of control,
And now you're going through a reframe process. Can you just kind of talk us through that and how you went through that?
Well, something I've said to some of the people I've worked with, and I hope this will get a chuckle out of some of your viewers. I say, you can try these steps, trigger, downshift, reframe. But if it's not working, I would suggest that you, in your mind, swear at me loudly and say, Mark, I don't give a F. I don't want to go trigger, downshift, reframe. Go F yourself. You got a better life than mine. Blah, blah, blah. And I say to them, knock yourself out. Just don't do anything destructive. And they start laughing because when they hear something that sounds so nice and calm, they need to get off their chest. I don't want to be civilized. I don't want to be grown up.
Right.
I want to be the F up. So go screw yourself, Mark. And I say, do it. Have at me. And then see if you feel a little bit better.
All right. What about when there's a letdown? This sort of crisis of expectations where you expected something to work out one way and it worked out very, very different. Your expectations were unmet. How do you reframe that?
You can say to yourself, you've been here before many times. You don't think you have a choice right now how you're going to respond, but you do. It's up to you. You can react. You can go out and get drunk. You can do whatever you want. And you might say, F you, Mark. I don't believe I have a choice. I just want to act out the way I usually do. And it helps to be able to call upon in your mind someone who believed in you, living or dead. One of my favorite anecdotes is about Tiger Woods in the 1997 Masters tournament, his first pro Masters tournament. He shoots 40 on the front nine. If you're not a golfer, that is not a good score. But he, at that time, still had a great relationship with his father, Earl Woods. And he goes to him and he says, Dad, I don't know what's going on. The wheels are coming off. But because he had that relationship with his father took the hit with him, hurt him. And then after he hurt him, he said, Tiger, you've been here 1,000 times. Just do what you need to do. And Tiger went out and shot 18 under par, which has never been equaled. And someone just equaled it 2 years ago, but that guy didn't shoot 40 on the front nine. That's the power of reaching inside.
Right.
To let someone talk you down.
Yeah. So the process is very similar to loss of control, where you say, it's happening for me. you reach to mentors, you refocus on a process that works for you, and you just drive on.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
And
about the final one where we get to anxiety?
well, you can say to yourself, yeah, you're worried about this, but what's your evidence it's going to happen? You can say to yourself, how often have you worried about things that never happen? And also, the reframe is, guess what? If it does happen and you learn to deal with it, you can maybe heal from what all those old expectations did to you. I mean, if you know you can heal from whatever life hits you with, you're going to be able to take more chances because you fall on your face. You can always pick yourself up.
All right. Somebody once described worry and anxiety as an effort to control the future. So I'm gonna worry about it, and that's my way of trying to see some sort of control over something I don't believe I can control, i.e., the future. And so you're saying, ask yourself, what's the evidence that this is going to go wrong, and what are the consequences if I essentially take counsel of my own fears?
Yeah. Now, I'm unusual. I'm a great believer in the power of relationships and coaches and mentors to talk us through things. And something you can do if you're in a marriage or you have I wouldn't do this with my kids because you might worry them too much. But there have been times, and I've been married a long time, and there have been times over the years where I would say to my wife, tell me I'm not stupid. Tell me I'm not a loser. What? She'll say, yeah, because I just did something that was so stupid. Oh, it was such a loser thing to do. Can you just tell me I'm not? And what happens is I will tell you, if you have a decent relationship, people who care about you want to care about you.
Right.
I'll tell you something. This is something you can point out to your spouses. I actually wrote an article. There's an epidemic right now for people. And the article is called Married with Children Displaced Anger Epidemic. Married with Children Displaced Anger Epidemic. It's on Newsweek. You can find it, Goulston Newsweek. And the epidemic is that a lot of young marriages with children where both are working, a lot of times, and a lot of younger generations are used to being impatient. You can be impatient until you have children. Then you have a child, you have an infant, you have a toddler who's not eating, who's not sleeping, who's tantruming. And what's happening, and it's an epidemic, is that a lot of young mothers don't want to yell at their child because then they feel like they're a bad mother, but they feel like yelling. And what happens is their husbands come home and they displace their anger onto the husband so that he feels everything he does is wrong.
Right.
And really what's happening is she's scared because she was so exhausted and so frustrated, she took it out on him. And the suggestion in the article is if instead of doing that, and those husbands who work hard too can often feel like everything I do is wrong, and then it escalates further. My suggestion to those tired, overwhelmed young mothers is to say to the husband, I feel like an awful mother. Maybe I shouldn't have had children. I mean, I just felt awful. I just felt like yelling all day. I didn't, but I just felt like it. I think there's something wrong with me. Well, when you take your husband out of the crosshairs, and this is not something that's his fault, he's going to say, you're a wonderful mother. You're just tired. You're right. A good mother. He's going to feel so great, but that's not happening. Do you follow me? They don't open up like that.
So in terms of trigger management, got the 3-step process. One, just acknowledge that you're being triggered. And you do it either saying, I've been triggered, or you have your sort of your mentors say, Mark, Chris, looks like you've been triggered. So that's the first step, is just to acknowledge it, get it out there in the open. The second step is downshift. So you're regaining control. You're creating some space between the stimulus you just received and the response that you're getting ready to make. And then the third is to reframe.
Yeah. And the easiest reframe is, as I mentioned it, just say to yourself, don't do anything to make it worse. Because see, when you do, you then have to apologize to people. You then have to deal with your own embarrassment that you went off the deep end, and you're going to miss the breakthrough.
Right. And if nothing else works, you're still like on the verge. You just say, screw you, Mark Goulston, and then that'll make everything right.
Oh yeah, I'll be happy. Hey, look, when you're like that, I'm Muhammad Ali. You're George Foreman. Knock yourself out.
There you go. Oh, Mark, thank you so much. This has been like a tour de force on how to manage your triggers. And it's going to be hugely helpful for people. So thank you.
Well, I hit you with utter delight, and I'm going to leave you with utter delight, because that's how I feel towards you, my friend.
Utter delight right back at you.